Hands on the car. Now. Vivian Mercer turned slowly. Officer, this is my car. My keys are right here. People like you don't drive cars like this. Please. I just left the hospital, I said, hands on the hood. Now. Phones rose all around them. One glowing screen after another. People recorded from every direction, but nobody stepped forward. Somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed. Vivian could feel the registration card inside her purse, carrying her own name, her own address, and the exact information for the silver Mercedes beside her. The car key pressed sharply into her closed fist. One call. That was all she wanted. None of the people watching knew the man who would soon step out of another vehicle and cross that parking lot toward the handcuffed woman. None of them knew he would reach her, drop beside her, and call her mom. Have you ever been judged guilty before you even had the chance to explain yourself? Before everything went wrong, Vivian Mercer had walked out of Ridgeview County Hospital carrying discharge papers and a list of instructions from her surgeon. Rest, move slowly, keep stress away from her heart. A nurse had offered to help her to the entrance. Vivian thanked her, adjusted the cardigan over her blouse, and leaned carefully on her cane. She stopped at Brookside Market for one small thing. Fresh peaches. They had been her late husband's favorite, and the memory of him had been especially close to her heart. Parking the silver Mercedes took patience. Vivian eased it into a space, checked the lines twice, and stepped out carefully. The car gleamed beneath the bright sun as she made her way toward the store, cane tapping against the pavement. Across the lot, a woman sat inside a gray sport utility vehicle and watched. Her name was Marlene Prescott. She lived only a few houses away from Vivian and had never once bothered to introduce herself. She had complained about Vivian's garden. She had complained about visitors coming to Vivian's home. She had found reasons to be irritated by a woman she barely knew. Now she stared at an older black woman stepping away from a luxury Mercedes, and something bitter stirred inside her. Marlene lifted her phone and called emergency services. "Yes, I'd like to report a theft in progress," she said in a calm voice. "There's a black woman breaking into a Mercedes at Brookside Market. She doesn't belong with a car like that. She might be armed. Please hurry." Every important part of the call was false. Vivian had the key. The title carried her name. She had not broken into anything. She was not armed. But the dispatcher heard the word armed, and the call instantly became more serious. Not far away, Officer Bryce Keller received the radio message. Bryce was still early in his police career and eager to prove that he mattered. A possible armed vehicle theft sounded important. It felt like the kind of call that might finally make him look decisive. He switched on his emergency lights and accelerated toward the market. He did not slow himself down long enough to question the information he had been given. In his mind, the suspect was already guilty. He had a description: black, female, older. I had a crime, vehicle theft. I had a stage, and as soon as he arrived, he would have an audience. What he did not have was the truth, not one piece of it. He did not know Vivian's full name. He did not know about the fresh stitches beneath her blouse. He did not know that she had spent much of her life working through pain, loss, and humiliation without surrendering her dignity. And he certainly did not know that. If he pushed her far enough, she would ask for one phone call to a number that could change everything. The patrol car entered the parking lot, fast. Tires cried against the asphalt as Bryce stopped at an angle and threw open his door before the vehicle had fully settled. He stepped out with one hand already near his holster, his jaw tight, his posture stiff, looking less like a man arriving to ask questions and more like someone who had already decided how the encounter would end. Vivian had just returned to her car. She carried 2 grocery bags with a small paper sack of peaches resting on top. The sudden siren made her turn. She squinted against the bright light, confused. "Step away from the vehicle," Bryce called. "Hands where I can see them." Vivian blinked. "Officer, is something wrong?" I said, "Step away from the vehicle. Now. This is my car. I was only putting my groceries inside." "Ma'am, I won't tell you again." Vivian slowly lowered the grocery bags to the pavement. Her hands trembled, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she was tired, and the area around her recent surgery was still tender. She lifted both palms. "All right," she said softly. "All right. I'm not doing anything." Bryce circled her with hard eyes. He looked at the silver Mercedes, then at Vivian, then back at the Mercedes. The car was polished, expensive, and spotless. Vivian wore a faded cardigan, orthopedic shoes, and carried a cane. In Bryce's mind, those things did not fit together. That difference became all the evidence he thought he needed. "Whose car is this?" he asked. "Mine. I've owned it for years." "Right," Bryce said with a short laugh. "And I'm the mayor." A few shoppers near the store entrance slowed down. One person raised a phone, then another. Soon, a loose circle had formed around the scene. People stood close enough to watch, but far enough away to avoid becoming involved. "Officer," Vivian tried again, still patient. "My registration is in my purse. My key is in my purse. If you would just let me show you. Don't reach for anything. I only want to show you." I said don't reach. Vivian froze. Her hand had barely moved toward the strap of her purse. Now it dropped back to her side. The peaches sat in their paper sack on the pavement, bright and ordinary in the middle of something that had suddenly become frightening. Bryce pressed his shoulder radio without taking his eyes off her. "Dispatch. I've got the suspect on scene. Older female matches the description. Vehicle present, possibly armed, standing by." "Suspect." Vivian repeated the word under her breath as though she did not recognize it. "Possibly armed." She looked at the officer. "Officer, I'm 68 years old. I just came from the hospital. The only things in that bag are peaches and my heart medicine." Bryce's expression hardened. He stepped closer and knocked her cane away with his foot. It clattered across the pavement, spun beneath a nearby car, and disappeared out of reach. Vivian swayed. Without the cane, her balance became uncertain. She caught herself against the warm hood of the Mercedes and breathed through a sudden pain that spread across her chest and into her arm. "Please," she whispered. "I recently had heart surgery. I can't stand for long." Hands on the hood. "Spread your feet." "Officer, I am telling you the truth." "Everybody says that." A young man near the shopping cart stepped forward. He wore a delivery uniform and had worried, decent eyes. "Hey, man," he called. "She's an older woman. Just check her identification. It'll take a few seconds." Bryce slowly turned his head. "Stay back, or you're next. Mind your business." The young man stopped. I did not walk away, but he did not move closer either. Instead, he raised his phone higher and began broadcasting the encounter live. The number of viewers started climbing. Vivian placed both hands flat on the hood. The heated metal burned against her palms. She lowered her head and a loose strand of gray hair fell across her face. "My name is on the title," she said quietly. "Vivian Mercer. Look it up. Please, just run the plate. It will tell you everything." Bryce did not run the plate. Instead, he pulled handcuffs from his belt. The metallic ratcheting sound cut through the parking lot. The people filming leaned in a little farther. "You're being detained for suspected vehicle theft," Bryce said. "Hands behind your back." Vivian turned her head. "I have stitches. Please don't put my arms behind me." I took hold of her wrist anyway. He pulled her arm down and back, bending her forward over the hood. Vivian gasped. A small sound of pain escaped her before she could stop it. "Please," she said. "You're hurting me. Stop resisting." "I'm not resisting. I can't move that fast." "Stop resisting." Bryce said the words loudly enough for every phone to capture them. It was a phrase with power. Anyone watching a recording later would hear an officer tell someone to stop resisting, and for a moment they might wonder whether the person really had resisted. Vivian had not. The first cuff closed around her wrist. Then Bryce pulled her second arm back to meet the first. The steel closed too tightly against thin skin already weakened by age and medication. Vivian squeezed her eyes shut and stopped making any sound. Another patrol car entered the lot. Officer Leah Rowan stepped out. She was younger and less experienced, and the scene in front of her immediately brought unease to her face. An older woman was bent over the hood of a car. Her cane lay beneath another vehicle. One wrist showed an injury where the cuff pressed against it. Leah opened her mouth as if she might say something. Then she looked at Bryce. She closed her mouth. She moved toward the edge of the crowd, rested her hands near her belt, and became one more person watching. Vivian's purse slipped from her shoulder during the struggle and hit the pavement. Its contents spilled out. A tube of lipstick rolled away. A bottle of prescription medicine skittered across the asphalt. And there, face up in plain view, was the laminated registration card. Vivian Mercer, the make and model of the Mercedes. The license plate, her address, her name printed clearly enough for anyone to read. The delivery driver saw it first. "Her name is right there," he shouted. "The paperwork is right there. You don't even have to look hard." Bryce glanced down. I saw the card. For one long second, he had a choice. He could bend down and pick it up. I could read it. He could feel that cold, sinking realization that comes when a person understands he has made a serious mistake. And he could begin, however awkwardly, to correct it. Instead, Bryce nudged the registration with the toe of his boot. He pushed it farther beneath the Mercedes, until it disappeared into shadow, just as Vivian's cane had disappeared beneath another car. "That doesn't prove anything," he said. "The paperwork could be stolen too. People steal documents along with cars." A murmur moved through the crowd. Some of it was discomfort. Some of it, disturbingly, was amusement. Someone laughed. It was a bright, careless sound, the kind of laugh that turns someone else's humiliation into entertainment. Vivian felt that laugh more deeply than she felt the handcuffs. She had known this kind of judgment before. As a child, she had walked beside her mother during civil rights demonstrations. She remembered being turned away from places where people like her were expected to accept that they did not belong. She had buried her husband. She had raised a son alone. She had cleaned office buildings after dark, pushing a mop across marble floors in towers she could never have afforded to live near, then gone home exhausted and done everything she could to give her child a better life. For decades, she had been forced to prove in small and exhausting ways that she belonged wherever she had every right to stand. And now, in a sunny parking lot with peaches resting near her feet, a stranger had decided almost immediately that none of her life mattered. "You think a woman like me can't own a car like this?" she said quietly. Bryce gave a dismissive snort. "I think this car costs more than you'll see in your whole life. You don't know my life. I know your type. My type." Vivian turned the words over carefully. "What type is that?" Bryce did not answer. Instead, he took her by the arm and turned her toward the crowd as though displaying the result of his work. The phones captured everything. An older woman in handcuffs, a wounded wrist, no cane, her breathing becoming heavier as she fought to remain standing. "Walk," Bryce ordered. Vivian tried. Her knees weakened. "I can't," she whispered. "My heart. Please, I need to sit down." "You can sit in the patrol car. Walk. I'm going to fall." Then she did. Her legs gave way beneath her. Because her hands were cuffed behind her back, she had no way to catch herself. She dropped hard onto her knees. The impact sent pain through her body and pulled a cry from her throat. Bryce did not immediately help her. He looked toward the crowd and shook his head as though she had disappointed him. "Classic," he said. "They always do this. Fake an injury, make a scene, play to the cameras." He crouched closer to Vivian and lowered his voice. "Get up. Nobody here believes you." But the phones had captured enough. They captured a 68-year-old woman on her knees in a parking lot. They captured the injury around her wrist. They captured the spilled medication, the abandoned cane, and the registration card lying beneath the car in shadow. They captured the peaches rolling from the torn paper sack and bruising against the pavement. What the cameras still had not captured was the truth of who Vivian Mercer was. Not yet. Near the gray sport utility vehicle at the edge of the lot, Marlene Prescott watched with her arms folded. A faint smile touched one corner of her mouth. She had wanted trouble for Vivian. She had not expected the lie to work this well. She had no understanding yet of what she had set in motion or how completely it would come back toward her. Near the front of the crowd, a woman pressed one hand over her mouth. "Someone should do something," she whispered. But she said it only to the friend beside her. She did not move. That is how moments like this become possible. Everyone waits for someone else, and because everyone is waiting, no one becomes the person who steps forward. Vivian remained on her knees and focused on breathing. In, out. Her surgeon's warning echoed in her mind. Avoid stress. The thought would almost have been funny if the pain in her chest had not been growing stronger. She thought of her son. She thought of the boy she had raised while working long nights. She remembered the promise she had once made to herself while kneeling on a cold office floor, that her child would grow up in a world a little fairer than the one she had known. She had believed that promise. Most days she still did. "Officer," Vivian said. Her voice was steadier now than anyone might have expected. "I would like to make a phone call." Bryce laughed. "You'll get your call at the station." "No," Vivian said. "I'd like to make it now. One call, that's all I'm asking." Something in her tone made a few people look up from their screens. She no longer sounded frightened. She sounded calm, certain, like someone who knew exactly which number she would dial, and exactly what would happen when the person on the other end answered. Bryce heard none of that. I was already pulling her back to her feet and steering her toward the patrol car. In his mind, he was already writing the report that would make him sound careful, controlled, and brave. I had no idea that the most important phone call of his career was about to be made because of him. Bryce opened the rear door and pushed Vivian toward the back seat. "Watch your head," he said without giving her enough time to do it. He folded her into the hot patrol car with one hand on her shoulder and shut the door. The vehicle had been sitting under the sun. The air inside was thick and stifling. Heat pressed against Vivian's chest like another weight. "Please," she said through the glass. "It's too hot. My heart. I need air." Bryce turned away as though the situation were finished. The delivery driver moved along the edge of the parking lot, keeping his phone pointed at the scene. "I recorded all of it," he called. "Everybody saw. Her papers were right there. You kicked them under the car." "Turn that off," Bryce said. "It's a public parking lot. I don't have to turn it off. I'll find a reason to take it." The young man's jaw tightened. His hand trembled. He lowered the phone slightly. Then he looked toward the older woman trapped in the back of the patrol car and lifted it again. It was one of the bravest choices anyone had made in that parking lot. And even then, it was still only a phone held by a man standing too far away to physically stop what was happening. The crowd began to thin. People had seen what they came to see. Some drifted back toward the store. Others continued filming. But the mood changed from alarm to something colder. Boredom, the uneasy detachment of people who know something is wrong, but have decided that it is not their responsibility. That can be one of the cruelest parts of a moment like this. Not only the person doing harm, the many quiet people who know better and say nothing. Inside the patrol car, Vivian felt the heat building. Sweat gathered on her forehead and ran into her eyes. The pain in her chest no longer came in short flashes. It stayed. It tightened and spread. Her breathing became shallow. The edges of the world began to look soft and gray. "Officer," she called. Her voice was weaker now. "Officer, please." "Something is wrong. My chest." Bryce glanced through the window. I saw an older woman slumped against the seat, her face pale and damp. But because he had already decided what he believed, he interpreted everything through that decision. "She's fine," he told Leah. "They always do this. The moment the cuffs go on, suddenly they're dying. It's a script. I've seen it before." Leah looked through the glass. She had not seen this enough times to dismiss what was in front of her. What she saw did not look like acting. It looked like genuine medical distress. "Bryce," she said quietly. "She doesn't look good. Her color is wrong. We should at least get medical help." Bryce looked at her. "Leah." He said her name like a door closing. "I've got seniority on this scene. Stand down." And Leah did. That choice would stay with her. She had felt the wrongness clearly. It sat cold in her stomach. But when the moment came to act on what she knew, she folded her hands and obeyed the louder person beside her. Her silence joined the other silences in the parking lot. Together, They formed a wall around Vivian Mercer. Vivian's cane was beneath a car. Her registration was beneath another. Her medicine had scattered across the pavement. The one stranger willing to defend her stood at a distance behind a phone, and the one officer who understood that something was wrong had just been told to remain silent. Vivian leaned her cheek against the hot glass and closed her eyes. She did not expect strangers to rescue her. Instead, she did the one thing still available to someone who felt stripped of everything else. She remembered who she was. She was Vivian Mercer. She had a name, whether Bryce Keller chose to read it or not. She had a son who loved her, and she knew a phone number by heart. At the other end of that number was the one person in the county who could walk into almost any law enforcement room and immediately be heard. Vivian opened her eyes. "I want my phone call," she said again, louder this time. "I know my rights. I want to make my call now." Bryce still did not turn around. "At the station." "I may not make it to the station," Vivian said. She said it plainly. No performance, no drama. That was what finally made the words land. "If you won't let me call, then every person here is watching you. Deny medical help and a phone call to a woman who may be having a heart attack. Look at the cameras. Look at how many there are." For the first time, Bryce hesitated, not because compassion had reached him, because he understood the risk. The phones were still raised. The audience on the live broadcast had grown into the thousands. Leah moved before Bryce could stop her. She crossed to the patrol car, opened the door, and crouched beside Vivian. Up close, there was no mistaking the older woman's condition. Sweat covered her face. Her skin had gone gray. Her breath came shallow and uneven. "Ma'am," Leah said gently, "is there someone we should call? Family? A lawyer?" Vivian turned her head, even through the pain. Her eyes remained steady. "Yes," she whispered, "there is." "What's the number?" Vivian told her. 10 digits, spoken slowly and clearly. Because Vivian's hands were still cuffed behind her back, Leah entered the number into her own phone. She did not recognize it. She pressed call and held the phone beside Vivian's ear. The line rang. Behind them, Bryce scoffed. "Who's she calling?" "Her social worker." The delivery driver stepped closer, still recording. He could sense that something had shifted, even though he did not yet know why. Then the call connected. A man's voice answered, warm but occupied, the voice of someone used to carrying a long list of responsibilities. "Mercer." Vivian closed her eyes. For the first time since the encounter began, her voice broke. "Donovan," she said. "Baby, it's your mother. I need you to come." Leah's expression changed instantly. She knew that name. Everyone in the department knew that name. It appeared on official memorandums. It was printed beside the title on the office at the top of the county building. It was spoken with straightened backs and lowered voices. "Donovan Mercer." Leah slowly turned toward Bryce, the phone still beside Vivian's ear. The color left her face. "Bryce," she said softly. "Bryce. What's her last name?" But Bryce was no longer listening. I was looking toward the far end of the parking lot. Blue and red lights were approaching. Several official vehicles entered together, moving with the tight formation of an escort rather than the scattered urgency of ordinary patrol cars. They stopped in an arc across the lot. Doors opened. Officers stepped out and immediately began clearing space. Their eyes swept across the scene, searching for one person. From the lead vehicle, a tall man emerged in a pressed uniform with silver insignia on his collar. At first, his face showed only controlled focus, the expression of someone who had heard something he could not believe until he saw it himself. The crowd opened for him without being asked. He scanned the parking lot, the spilled groceries, the cane beneath a car, the Mercedes, the patrol vehicle with its rear door open. Then he saw Vivian. Chief Donovan Mercer stopped moving. For 1 second, the composure in his face disappeared. I saw the marks around his mother's wrist. He saw how pale she looked. I saw the handcuffs. "Mom." The word came out cracked and small, a sound nobody expected from a man carrying that much authority. Then he ran. Donovan crossed the parking lot in long strides, dropped onto both knees beside the patrol car, and, took his mother's face gently in his hands. "Mom, I'm here. I'm here. Look at me." "Donovan," Vivian breathed. "You came." "Of course I came." His voice shook. "Who did this? Who put these cuffs on you?" He reached behind her and felt the handcuffs. His hands stopped. They were too tight. The skin beneath them was damaged. A person does not easily forget the moment he sees someone he loves injured by a choice that never needed to be made. "Key," Donovan said. His voice had changed. It was flat, controlled, and cold enough to carry across the silent parking lot. "Whose prisoner is this? I want the key. Now." Nobody moved at first. "The key," Donovan repeated. Leah reached for her belt with shaking hands, stepped forward and unlocked the cuffs. They came away from Vivian's wrists, exposing deep red marks where the metal had pressed into her skin. Donovan took his mother's hands carefully in his own. The crowd watched as the chief of county police lifted her injured wrists and pressed them gently to his lips. The parking lot became completely silent. The people watching through the live broadcast seemed to fall silent too, until the comment stream suddenly filled with the same realization. Bryce stood frozen nearby. His thoughts were racing and taking him nowhere he wanted to go. He had processed the original description through every assumption he carried. Not one of those assumptions had made room for the truth standing in front of him now. He tried to speak. "Sir, I was responding to a call. Possible armed theft. I didn't know." Donovan slowly rose. The deliberate calm in his movement was more unsettling than anger would have been. He turned toward Bryce and simply looked at him. For a long moment he said nothing. "Her name," Donovan finally said, "is Vivian Mercer." Bryce swallowed. "Sir, she raised me by herself in a small apartment on Maple Street," Donovan continued. "Do you know how she did that?" Bryce said nothing. "She cleaned offices at night after working another job. She mopped marble lobbies in downtown buildings, so I could have shoes that fit and books for school. She came home exhausted, with her back aching and her hands cracked, and she never once made me carry the weight of what it cost her." The crowd did not move. "That car," Donovan said, and his voice nearly broke again. "The one you decided she couldn't possibly own. I bought it for her when I became chief." He looked toward the silver Mercedes. Then he saw the registration card, still lying beneath it in shadow. "I wanted my mother to have something beautiful, after spending most of her life being treated like she should be grateful for less. I told her she had spent too much of her life being overlooked and looked down on. I told her, never again." His eyes returned to Bryce. "And today, she couldn't buy peaches without a man deciding she was a criminal because of the color of her skin and the price of her car." "Sir," the description matched. Donovan's expression tightened. "Older black female. That was the description. And that was enough for you." Bryce's face had gone pale. "You didn't run the plate," Donovan continued. "You didn't read the registration lying at your feet. A witness says you kicked it under the car. There is a live broadcast of this scene. There are thousands of viewers. There are body cameras, yours and Officer Rowan's." He looked directly at Bryce. "I am going to watch every second of what happened here. Every word you said to my mother. Every choice you made after evidence was placed directly in front of you. And I think you already know what I am going to see." Then Vivian spoke. "Donovan." He turned immediately. In that single movement, the chief disappeared and the sun returned. Vivian looked at him from the patrol car. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't let me watch you become him." Donovan's jaw loosened. "Help me up first," Vivian said. "My peaches are all over the ground." A sound moved through the crowd, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Donovan released a breath he had been holding. He slid one arm carefully beneath his mother's and helped her stand, taking as much of her weight as she needed. "Somebody get her cane," he called, "and call paramedics. She recently had heart surgery, and she has been left on this pavement in the heat." His voice sharpened at the end, and several officers moved at once. The delivery driver hurried forward, reached under the car, and retrieved Vivian's cane. "Here, ma'am," he said. "I got it." Vivian looked at him carefully, really looked at him. Then she squeezed his arm. "You're the one who kept talking," she said. "When everyone else went quiet, I heard you." Thank you, baby. The young man's eyes filled with tears. He nodded because he could not seem to find words. Donovan watched the exchange. Then he turned toward the crowd and all the raised phones. This young man, he said, pointing toward the driver, was the only person in this parking lot who kept speaking up. Dozens of you watched. He spoke. Donovan let the words settle. Remember that the next time you tell yourself there was nothing you could do. Then he faced Bryce again. His voice became almost gentle. Officer Keller, hand your weapon and your badge to Officer Rowan. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. Pending a full investigation into excessive force, unlawful detention, and the treatment of a 68-year-old woman recovering from heart surgery. Bryce's hands shook as he unclipped his badge. Sir, please, I have a family. I made a mistake. It was a mistake. Donovan held his gaze. My mother made a mistake too, he said. She believed that if she worked hard enough and lived honestly enough, the world would always see her as a person before it saw anything else. He looked down at the badge after it was placed in his palm. A small piece of metal had given one man enough authority to put an older woman on her knees. At the far edge of the parking lot, Marlene Prescott began quietly backing toward her sport utility vehicle. She hoped no one remembered who had placed the original call. But the delivery driver's camera had recorded her too. It had even recorded the faint smile she wore while Vivian was being detained. Don't let that woman leave, Donovan said without raising his voice. He nodded toward the gray vehicle. She placed the call. I want to know exactly what she told dispatch about a woman she has barely spoken to in her life. Two officers moved toward Marlene. Her confident expression collapsed. In the center of the parking lot, Vivian Mercer finally stood on her own 2 feet again, leaning on her cane and on her son. Peaches lay bruised across the pavement. Sunlight warmed her face. She looked toward the crowd that had watched her fall. She did not smile. She did not speak, but she was standing. Paramedics arrived and guided Vivian onto a gurney despite her protests. They wrapped her injured wrist and connected medical monitors. The readings concerned them. Her blood pressure had risen dangerously. Her heart rhythm was unstable. The lead medic's expression tightened when he saw the marks left by the handcuffs. How long was she restrained like this? He asked. Leah answered quietly. Longer than she should have been. The medic looked toward Bryce. I did not need to say anything. Donovan remained beside his mother, one hand wrapped around hers, but his attention also turned to the parking lot around them. It had become a courtroom without walls, dozens of phones, a live audience that continued to grow, 2 body cameras, and in the middle of it all stood the officer responsible, pale and without his badge. Officer Keller, Donovan said. Before the medics take my mother, I want you to hear something while the cameras are still recording. Not because I'm the chief, because everyone here deserves to understand what happened. Donovan held up the registration card. I had picked it up from beneath the Mercedes himself. This was lying on the ground, face up, her name, her license plate, her address. It took seconds to read. You stood over it and called it fake. Why? Bryce struggled to answer. The call said armed theft. I was following the call. The call, Donovan repeated. He turned toward the officers, holding Marlene nearby. Bring me the woman who made it. Marlene was walked forward. She had stopped trying to leave. Her arms were folded tightly over her chest, and her chin was raised in the defensive posture of someone who had decided that acting offended might protect her. I don't see what I did wrong, she said before anyone asked her a question. I saw something suspicious and I reported it. That's my right as a citizen. You told dispatch she was armed, Donovan said. Was she armed? I thought she might be. You told dispatch she was breaking into the car. Did you see her break into anything? Marlene opened her mouth. No clear answer came. Donovan looked at a note an officer had handed him. She lives only a few houses away from you. You've made repeated complaints about her garden and her visitors. Today you saw a woman you've resented for years step out of a nicer car than yours, and you called the police and claimed there might be a weapon. I didn't. It wasn't like that. Filing a false police report is a crime, Donovan said, especially when the false information includes a weapon. and helps put an older woman in handcuffs and on her knees. He held Marlene's gaze. You will give a full statement at the station. The recording of your emergency call will be reviewed with it. Marlene's offended posture disappeared. She began to cry, frightened now by consequences she had never expected to face. Donovan turned back toward Bryce. The public edge left his voice. It became quieter and more personal. Here is what will happen. Internal Affairs will review every second of available footage. You will be investigated for excessive force, unlawful detention, and denial of medical care. That is not me using my position against you. That is the law applying to you the same way you swore it would apply to everyone else. Sir, please. Bryce's voice cracked. I have 2 children. This is going to end me. Donovan studied him. You keep telling me what this will cost you, he said. You haven't said anything about what you did to her. He looked toward Vivian. You never said you were sorry to the woman who was bleeding on the pavement. You're frightened now, because you understand what this may cost you. But fear for yourself is not the same thing as remorse for what you did. And that is the whole problem, son. The word son hung in the air. It was the same dismissive word Bryce had thrown at Vivian earlier, now returned without shouting and without cruelty. Everyone heard it. Bryce looked ready to argue. Then his shoulders dropped. Whatever defense he had been building seemed to collapse all at once. For the first time, he looked directly at Vivian on the gurney. A bandage covered her wrist. Oxygen rested beneath her nose. Ma'am, he said. His voice was barely audible. I'm sorry. I am sorry. Vivian turned her head. The crowd became still. For a long moment, she simply looked at him. There was no hatred in her face. Somehow, that was more powerful than anger would have been. I believe you're frightened, she said. I don't think you're sorry yet. Bryce lowered his eyes. Sorry takes longer. Sorry is something you do, not something you say in a parking lot when cameras are watching. Vivian paused to breathe. But I hope you get there. I truly do. Because a man who never gets there does this again to someone who doesn't have a son with a badge. The sentence reached everyone at once. That was the deeper truth beneath the entire scene. Vivian Mercer had finally received help because she knew one number to call, and because the person who answered happened to be the most powerful law enforcement officer in the county. Every person watching understood the question her words raised. What happens to the people who do not have that number? What happens to the person placed in the back of a hot patrol car while people record and wait? What happens when there is no chief to call mom? Donovan heard it too. He looked at his mother and nodded slowly, as though she had just handed him an assignment more important than anything he had planned for the day. You're right, he said, and I'm going to do something about it. The paramedics began moving the gurney. Vivian reached out and caught her son's sleeve. The peaches, she said. Donovan nearly laughed through the tightness in his throat. I'll get your peaches, Mom. As the paramedics wheeled Vivian toward the ambulance, the chief of county police bent down in the middle of the crowded parking lot. In front of thousands of strangers watching through phones, he picked up the spilled and bruised peaches one by one. He placed them back into the paper sack and carried them after his mother, as if they were the most important evidence in the world. Vivian remained in the hospital until the doctors were satisfied that her heart had survived the strain. They told her it had been pushed dangerously hard, but it had held. She was tougher than her medical chart suggested. She always had been. The video spread quickly. Millions of people watched it. News crews gathered outside the county building. The demands for punishment came fast. Fire him. Charge him. Make an example of him. Donovan came to his mother's hospital room in uniform and sat beside her in the plastic chair, suddenly looking more like the boy she had raised than the chief everyone else knew. They want me to throw the book at him, he said. Some people want him destroyed. After what he did to you, I could make sure nobody questions it. Vivian stayed quiet for a moment. And what would that fix? She asked. It would feel like justice. Feeling like justice and being justice aren't always the same thing. She took his hand. If you destroy one man and make him the entire lesson, the next, Bryce Keller watches the news and learns only one thing. Donovan waited. "Don't get caught doing it to the wrong old woman," Vivian said. "Don't do it to someone who matters. Don't do it to someone with a powerful son." Donovan looked at her. "Then what do you want?" Vivian told him. She did not ask for money. She did not ask him to use his position to ruin Bryce. Bryce would still face the law and the disciplinary process based on what he had actually done. What Vivian wanted was larger, slower, and harder than revenge. She wanted body cameras that officers could not simply switch off during stops. She wanted clear rules requiring officers to verify the registration or identification already in front of them before a detention was allowed to continue without good reason. She wanted meaningful training, not a box checked on a form. Training that placed officers in rooms with people they too easily misread, so that the reflex to assume the worst could be challenged and unlearned. And she wanted one more thing: a program, a standard, a name that sounded official enough to survive after the headlines disappeared. "Call it whatever you want," Vivian told her son. "But I'll tell you what it's really for. It's for every person who gets stopped and doesn't have a son with a badge to call." She squeezed his hand. "They're the people this has to be about, not me. I was lucky. I want you to build something for the people who aren't." Not long afterward, the county announced the Mercer standard. Body cameras would remain active during stops. Officers would be required to complete a verification step before continuing certain detentions when identification or registration was readily available. A community review board would include ordinary citizens who could examine footage and demand answers. The delivery driver, who had refused to stop filming, was named Derek Lawson. He became the first civilian appointed to the new review board. Bryce Keller was not sent to prison, though he accepted responsibility for lesser charges and lost his law enforcement certification. He would never wear a badge again. Before the case was fully closed, Vivian did something almost nobody expected. She asked to meet him. They sat across from one another in a quiet room. There were no cameras. Vivian did not lecture him. She told him about Maple Street. She told him about the marble floors she cleaned and the shoes she struggled to buy for her son. She told him about the boy who grew up to become a man people listened to. She told him about being a child, holding her mother's hand. The first time a man in authority looked at her as though she were a problem that needed to be removed. "I've been afraid of that look for most of my life," Vivian said. "You gave it to me in that parking lot when I was 68 years old." Bryce kept his eyes on the table. "I'm too old to spend the rest of my life being afraid of it," she continued. "So I'm going to tell you the truth instead." She leaned slightly forward. "You were not born seeing me that way. Somebody taught you. Maybe many people taught you. Maybe you picked up pieces of it without noticing. But anything learned can be unlearned if a person has enough courage to sit with the discomfort of admitting that something inside him needs to change." Bryce began to cry. It was not the frightened crying from the parking lot, when consequences had finally become real. This was quieter, slower. It looked less like fear and more like the beginning of understanding. Vivian stood carefully and gathered her cane. Before she reached the door, she looked back. "The day you arrested me carried a memory of my husband," she said. "I went to that market because I wanted peaches. I never did get those peaches home." A faint smile appeared on her face. "My son brought me new ones. Now he keeps bringing me peaches. Funny, the things that can come out of a terrible day." She rested one hand on the cane. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Keller." Then she walked out on her own 2 feet. Later, Vivian Mercer stood at the front of a police training room. Not in handcuffs, at a podium. Every new officer in the county heard her story as part of their training. Vivian told it in her own voice. She showed them the photograph of the registration card lying beneath the Mercedes in shadow. Then she asked one question: "What would you have done?" The Mercer standard spread beyond the county and was adopted by several neighboring jurisdictions. Derek Lawson continued serving on the review board. Marlene Prescott completed the sentence imposed in her case and eventually moved away. Bryce continued writing to Vivian, and she wrote back. Vivian kept driving the silver Mercedes. She kept buying peaches, and nobody questioned whether she belonged behind the wheel again. If this story moved you, think about the part that is easiest to overlook. The most unforgettable moment may seem like the arrival of the police chief, the convoy entering the parking lot, or the instant a powerful man dropped beside the detained woman and called her mom. But Vivian's story asks us to look at something quieter. The people who were already there. The people who could see that something was wrong. The people who filmed, whispered, felt uncomfortable, and waited for someone else to become brave first. Most of us like to imagine that we would speak up immediately. Life is rarely that simple. Fear can make decent people quiet. Uncertainty can make people hesitate. Authority can make someone question what his own eyes are telling him. Officer Rowan knew something was wrong, but she allowed seniority to silence her. The people in the crowd knew something was wrong, but many convinced themselves that recording was enough. Derek was frightened too, yet he kept speaking. His courage did not look dramatic. He did not charge at an officer. He did not turn himself into a hero. He simply refused to pretend that what he was seeing was acceptable. That mattered. Vivian also understood something deeper about justice. Consequences matter. Responsibility matters. Bryce could not be allowed to keep the authority he had misused. Marlene could not make a false report and walk away as though her words had no effect. But Vivian did not confuse accountability with revenge. She wanted the people responsible to answer for what they had done, and then she wanted the system to become safer for the person who would come after her. That is why she asked for better rules instead of only harsher punishment. That is why she asked for training instead of only anger. That is why she sat across from Bryce without cameras and told him the truth about what his choices had done to her. Forgiveness, in Vivian's story, did not mean pretending the harm was small. It did not mean removing consequences. It did not mean trusting someone before that trust had been earned again. It meant refusing to let one terrible day decide what kind of person she would become. And responsibility meant more than saying "I'm sorry" when the cost finally reached your own doorstep. Vivian said it plainly. Sorry is something you do. Real remorse shows itself in what a person learns, what he repairs, what he changes, and what he refuses to repeat. There is a lesson in that for all of us. Even if we never wear a badge and never stand in a parking lot like the one Vivian faced. We make judgments every day. We decide who looks trustworthy, who seems successful, who belongs, who deserves patience. Sometimes we make those decisions before a person has said a single word. A life can be harmed by one person, making the wrong assumption and refusing to reconsider it. But a life can also be protected by one person who slows down, checks the facts, and chooses not to follow the crowd. The story is not asking everyone to become reckless or confront danger without thinking. Courage can be responsible. It can mean calling for help. It can mean recording when it is lawful and safe to do so. It can mean calmly pointing out evidence that is being ignored. It can mean asking another person whether they need assistance. It can mean refusing to laugh when someone else is being humiliated. Sometimes kindness is as simple as making sure the person standing alone realizes that somebody sees them as human. And sometimes the most important choice comes after the mistake has already happened. Do we protect our pride, or do we admit we were wrong? Do we look only at what the consequences will cost us, or do we finally look at what our actions cost someone else? Do we become defensive, or do we become teachable? Vivian could not recover the fear she felt inside that hot patrol car. She could not erase the pain in her chest, or the memory of falling onto the pavement with her hands cuffed behind her. Donovan could not undo the moment he saw his mother injured. Leah could not erase the instant she knew she should speak, and chose silence instead. Derek could not make the entire crowd act differently. But each person still had a next choice that matters more than we sometimes realize. A bad choice can have consequences. A better next choice can begin repair. Vivian's strength was not only that she survived what happened. It was that she used the worst moment of the story to create something that might protect strangers she would never meet. She understood that she had been lucky in one important way. She had a number to call. Most people do not. So the real work was never supposed to be cheering only when the powerful son arrived. The real work was learning how to become the one decent voice in the parking lot before he ever had to come. that does not require a title. It does not require a badge. It does not require power. It requires attention. It requires empathy. And sometimes it requires the courage to say, calmly and clearly, this doesn't look right. Please check again. There is also something worth remembering in the way Vivian treated Bryce after everything was over. She did not excuse him. She did not ask the county to ignore the law. She did not pretend his apology in the parking lot had repaired the damage. But she left open the possibility that a person who had done real harm could still learn something and choose not to remain the same. That possibility is not guaranteed. Change has to be proven through choices. But Vivian believed that if harmful assumptions can be learned, then they can also be challenged, questioned, and unlearned. That is a hopeful idea without being a naive one. People should answer for what they do, and people should also be encouraged to become better than the worst thing they have done. Those two ideas can exist together. Maybe that is why the Peaches stayed with Donovan. In the middle of sirens, badges, cameras, anger, and consequences, his mother was still thinking about something ordinary. A small paper bag of fruit, connected to someone she loved and missed. So he bent down and gathered the bruised peaches one by one. That image says something important. Justice is necessary. Rules matter. Accountability matters. But humanity matters too. Sometimes repair begins with a policy. Sometimes it begins with an apology that is finally sincere. And sometimes it begins with bending down to pick up what someone else knocked to the ground. If you ever find yourself in a moment when everybody around you is waiting for somebody else to do the right thing, remember Vivian Mercer. Remember Leah Rowan, who knew the feeling of wishing she had spoken sooner. Remember Derek Lawson, whose hands shook, but who kept his phone raised and his voice steady. Remember Donovan, who had every reason to answer humiliation with humiliation, but listened when his mother told him not to become the thing he was angry at. And remember Vivian herself, who asked not only for justice for what happened to her, but protection for people who might never have anyone powerful to call. That is what living kindly can look like when kindness is tested. It is not weakness. It is not silence. It is the courage to protect dignity, including the dignity of people who cannot repay you. It is the strength to accept consequences without turning them into cruelty. It is the humility to admit when your assumptions were wrong. It is the patience to let an apology become action. And it is the choice to leave something better behind after a terrible day. So here is the question Vivian's story leaves with us. Have you ever seen something wrong? Felt that cold discomfort telling you that somebody should speak, and stayed quiet because you hoped another person would do it first? Most of us have had a moment like that. The point is not to condemn ourselves for it. The point is to recognize the next moment when it comes. Maybe next time we can be the person who checks the facts. Maybe we can be the person who refuses to laugh. Maybe we can be the person who asks whether someone needs help. Maybe we can be the voice that says, please look again. Because somebody out there may be waiting for exactly that. Vivian received justice because she had one extraordinary number to call. Most people do not. The real work is not cheering only after power arrives. The real work is choosing courage, responsibility, kindness, and humanity before it ever has to. Be that voice. Somebody out there is waiting for it.